I am Dr. Irvin Howard. Started the youth programs at the Inland Empire Gay and Lesbian Community Center in San Bernardino in 1982. There was a need because I was running into kids on the streets. I was getting phone calls. People knew that I was gay. I had been in the newspaper a lot, being interviewed for topics related to gay and lesbian students and school safety. And the more I spoke to kids and realized that these kids had no place to go. If they were having familial problems, there was no place for them. If they were having problems in schools, counselors and teachers hadn't been trained how to handle problems of gay and lesbian youth. I was really concerned about already seeing a trend in the increase in suicide and violence. So I decided that we needed to do something and approached people I knew at the university where I was teaching and said, we really need to have a program for gay and lesbian youth. And they supported the program. So we started a 24-hour hotline. We started a lending library. We started youth wraps, youth counseling, family counseling. And that was in addition to programs for adults, all different sorts of programs. Well, the hotline grew way beyond what we thought it was going to be because it was a public hotline. It was an 800 number, which could be reached worldwide. And we had military bases here. We had March and Norton and Fort George and all the other military bases here. So a lot of young military people, men and women, because there was no way for them to have outreach of any kind. They were calling the hotline as well as other people, but we got lots and lots of calls from teenagers. And they all started out as, I have a friend. It was never about them. It was always about, I know somebody or I have a friend, and how can I help them? And eventually, in the conversations, it would come out that it was them that they were talking about. And a lot of those conversations were very painful, lots of tears. A lot of them were experiencing rejection by family members, by friends. Some of them had been beaten up. Some of them were experiencing isolation. I was really concerned about the number of kids that called to complain about teachers, school administrators, school counselors. I was teaching at Cal State San Bernardino, and I was getting phone calls about this professor or that professor, and they made these comments. They made a comment to me, they called me a name in class. That I could handle differently because I was at the university. But when you've got kids calling from all over the place, you can't just reach out to them. So the hotline was our contact. And what we tried to do with those kids is try to find some support for them. If they were local, we try to get them into the center to the RAP group or for individual counseling, whatever. But part of that problem was, how do you deal with the kids whose families were rejecting them, whose families had already kicked them out to the street, whose families were just really, really physically and psychologically abusing them. And a lot of the kids that we found that were going through that abuse, they would get abused by mom or dad, or they get abused by an older sibling. And if there was a younger sibling, they would abuse the younger sibling. If there was no younger sibling, but if there was a pet, they'd abuse the pet. If not, they would go to school and they would abuse other kids because they were feeling all this pent-up anger of what was happening to them. And so the goal of the hotline and the counseling was to give these kids an outlet to express what they were going through, but also to find solutions to the problems. And I like to believe that we were successful. I saw a lot of our kids grow into adults that then became a part of our center and became a part of the center now in the sense of helping other kids, working in the center. Many of those kids over the years then were trained to actually respond to phone calls, answer the calls that were coming in, and talk to other kids. And I think to some ways that was kind of a model for the Trevor Project. We didn't have people to work the hotline all night, but the hotline was open all night. So we had a rollover service so that if somebody called at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was nobody there to answer, but the phone would roll over to me. And then I would get the call at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I can remember early on getting a phone call from a manager at Walmart's in Rialto saying, hey, I'm not calling for me, but we've got a kid who's living out by our dumpsters. He's been there for days now. And he's already told me he's gay and there's no place for him to go. What can you do for him? I said, he's sleeping in the dumpsters. The guy said, yeah, he's sleeping here. And we give him some food and stuff, but we don't know where to send him. And the police here, they don't want to deal with it. I said, okay, I'll be there. And I got dressed and I drove over there and got my flashlight out looking in the dumpsters, and I found this kid. And he had fear in his eyes more than anything else, like, where are you going to take me? What are you going to do? And I simply said, you know what? We are not set up to handle you. I said, but I'm not leaving you here either. I said, so get your stuff together and get in the car, put your stuff in the trunk, and you'll come home with me, and we'll work this out. And that became, that was in 1982, 1983. And that became the norm for me rescuing kids, boys in particular. Girls were taken by another individual from the university to her home. But for the boys, I ended up having my dirty dozen, you know, my 12 boys. Actually, there had been 15, but 3 of them did not follow the house rules and they got expelled into other places. But there was no place for these kids to go legally. The system was not set up for foster care for LGBT kids. The courts weren't set up to deal with it either. So that was a problem. The only place that was available was what was known as a glass house in LA County. But I couldn't take a kid there because you're crossing county lines and you're illegally transporting a kid. So we found out ways that we could do that, but it wasn't the best situation. And there weren't a huge amount of kids at that time, but keep in mind that San Bernardino, Riverside area is a merging point for the railroads, for the freeways. So you've got kids from all over the country who get kicked out of their homes, abandoned by their families, and I do mean abandoned. It was not unusual to find kids who would come home from school and find that their families had moved out of their apartment and gone and not told them where they were going. They just left them there. Or families that would leave the house and they'd be gone, and the kid was there with the clothes on his back. And I just couldn't deal with that. I think the other part of this is that I was raised in a family in New York, my mom and dad and 4 siblings, and there were always strange kids in our house, always. They always knew who my mom and dad were, and they always knew that my mom and dad had an open house policy, and that is that if you can't go home, then you come here and you'll sleep in our basement or whatever, but you'll eat well, you'll be kept clean and warm. And to this day, my 2 brothers and my sister, my mom and dad are gone, but I can go to their homes anytime, and there's always a strange kid like, who is that one, or where did that one come from? And it's just the way we were raised. Mm-hmm. And I think I wish more people could do it. Yeah. So, but we, the very first kid I had, his parents found out he was gay. They kicked him out. He went to his grandparents' house. They found out he was gay. They kicked him out. And he ended up at the center, and I met him. And he had dropped out of high school. And I, in this whole thing, had said, if I'm going to do this, I need to protect myself, but I also need to protect the kids. But I also have to have rules. So I set up my rules that were posted on the refrigerator door. And it says that every kid signed a contract about what they would do in this house. And there were, no overnight guests, no drugs, no alcohol. You have chores. You go to school. Everybody who had dropped out of school had to go back to school and finish school. You had to do homework when you came home. There was fun time also, but I needed to have as normal a life as I could provide for them. And a lot of that was accepting and dealing with the fact that they were gay or lesbian. And I think for a lot of these kids that ended up in my home and other homes, the fact that they could openly talk about it, share their feelings, their emotions, their experiences, that they could, they could find a place where they could be affectionate with other kids in the house. And for them, a lot of kids who had not had any affection from their families for a long time, when the family found out they were gay, this was a really safe place for them. And that was important to me. Longest was Jason, and Jason was with me for 12 years. Jason called me the very first time on the hotline. He was at a conversion therapy center in Colorado, and he had been able to sneak out of his room one night when nobody was in the main office and get into the office. He knew the number of the hotline, and he called, and I got the call, and he just cried, saying, "You've got to get me out of here because they're going to kill me." He said, I've tried to kill myself 3 times already. I said, the next time I'll know how to do it the right way. And I talked to him and arranged to talk to him again. And I was determined to get him out of there. And I had worked on Amendment 2 in Colorado and had some connections there, and went there and told them the story about this kid and what was happening at this conversion therapy center. And it was run by a church. And I got the support of some political people, and they went with me, and we got him out of there. And I brought him here. By that time, he was 17 years old, had never seen a doctor, had never seen a dentist, and was already starting to experience what commonly is known as neuroimmune disorder. And it affects, psychologically affects you as far as depression goes. And nice kid, bright kid, had other physical problems. But I brought him here to my home and felt it was a good place for him, because I had a lot of really good people, professionals at the university in psychology and nursing, and knew other people in the community through my work with the AIDS Project. And he was getting the attention he needed. And over that period of time, he really blossomed. And for the most part, I like to believe that he had a better life than he had before. Unfortunately, he got misdiagnosed with a health issue, and he died last year of stage 4B cancer. My recommendation for anybody is, if you haven't seen the film Latter Days, see Latter Days, because the conversion therapy center that Jason was at was the spitting image of what that kid was going through in that movie. Ice baths, shock, genitalia shock therapy, extreme hard work, getting on the floor with the toothbrush and scrubbing the tiles, working hours and hours in the kitchen, only to see the stuff that they were working on thrown away because they weren't fed that stuff. Just no personal contact with anybody. In hopes of converting them from the homosexual lifestyle to being heterosexual. And a lot of time spent with Bibles and scripture, because almost all of these are faith-based. A lot Mormon, Jehovah's Witnesses. So Amendment 2 in Colorado was going on at the same time as a proposition here in California was going on in Riverside. And the basic propositions for Amendment 2 and the one here in California was to deny rights and privileges to people who are gay, lesbian, HIV positive, or people with AIDS. And usually sponsored by church organizations. The organization in Riverside, California, that modeled Amendment 2 was run by a group called Concerned Citizens, sponsored by a very large mega church in Riverside. And they collected enough signatures on a proposition to put it on the ballot, the November ballot, that would have legalized discrimination against people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or people with AIDS. And by legalizing the discrimination, it would cut off services provided by the city. No access to the public library, no access to public schools. This is what they were trying to do. So what we did in the proposition here was myself and Connie Confer, Lambda Legal Defense and Education organization, our attorneys, fought for 2 years to get the state to take the proposition off the ballot, which had never been done in any place. Once you collected the signatures required to have you on the ballot, you're on the ballot. Our goal was to get you off the ballot. Since it had been approved for the ballot, they had collected enough signatures. So we sued, they countersued, it went to the Superior Court. They found in our favor that it should not be on the ballot. They countersued and went to the appeals court. Then it went to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court sent it to the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court heard the case and remanded it back to the lower court. And in remanding it back to the lower court, my favorite line in their final decision was the justice wrote that the only thing lacking in the proposition by Concerned Citizens was a sack of stones for the throwing. I mean, it's a real condemnation of what that group was trying to do. That group, the ballot was taken, the initiative was taken off the ballot. People never voted on it. People never saw it until Proposition 8 came up. And then they were right back at it again. However, the interesting thing is that you will not find, since that time, this is the 1990s, you have not seen another initiative on the ballot having to deal with the LGBT community, because they know that we are organized, we have support, a larger support group now, and the Supreme Court has come out and saying you can't do that. You cannot try to legally discriminate against people, and that's what they were trying to do. And we fought that and we won.
Yeah.
There was a price to be paid for that. My relationship ended over that. Because of the violence and the risks. My brakes were cut in my car one day. I came home to my house in the canyon with my partner, and we found a dead cat nailed to our front door. I was having a dinner party at my house, and we got a phone call saying, you faggots have 2 minutes to get out of your house before we blow it up. And I lived in a valley, and called the police. The police came out, and they had seen lights up on the hillside, and they felt that we needed to get out. So I left my home for 2 weeks and hid out in the mountains at somebody's cabin. But that's what we went through.
Wow.
So it was too much, and I understand it for my partner. I was fighting the battle, he wasn't. And we remained friends, but that was that. Incredibly proud. Like I said, 3 of them, it didn't work out for them. But all of the others, out of the relationship of those boys as creating a family, and that was one of the other things I did, is that as a new boy would come in, I would call the other boys who had left. They'd already grown up, they'd gotten jobs, they'd finished college, they were very successful. I would call them and say, we have a new boy. And I'd have a barbecue, and they would all come, and they would meet the new guy and spend time with him. And then I would leave, so they would have their own little thing without me being there. And that was their time to talk about me. And so they could explain the rules and how they need to work with me. And I was fine with that. But they all stay in touch with each other. They get together. I try to see them whenever I can. As a matter of fact, I go to the theater now, and 2 or 3 of them will join me. I have season tickets, and they'll join me at different plays and such. Mm-hmm. So I'll see them.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, they're all healthy. Mm-hmm. They're all well-adjusted, and like I said, very successful. I'm proud of every single one of them. And they've helped other people. They've gone out and worked with organizations in LA, San Diego, Orange County, wherever they are. They get involved in their community. I came out to my parents when I was 18, and I didn't have any choice. A neighbor, my mother and father's house, I'd gone to college, a neighbor had said that they had seen me at a gay pride parade in Chicago, and they did me the favor of telling my parents. And I came home, and my mother and father said, Bob said this. I said, okay, do you want to take Bob's word for it, or do you want to talk to me about it? And they said, no, we want you to tell us what's going on. And I told them. Luckily, my father had a brother who was gay, who unfortunately later died of AIDS. But it wasn't a big deal to them. My parents, we are Jewish by faith, and I like to believe that we are, as a faith, as a community, much more accepting. We do more volunteering, more service. We were raised by my mom so that every Christmas, we don't celebrate Christmas, but my mother would gather the 4 of us up and take us to Hempstead Community Hospital, and we would be cleaning bedpans or serving meals or washing floors on Christmas so other people could go home and have the holiday with their kids. My mom and dad were always involved in community things, and always aware of differences. I went to a high school that was very diverse in New York, and it was not unusual to find all sorts of people, different languages, different cultures, different religions in our home. And I remember somebody came to my bar mitzvah and to the party my parents had in our backyard for that. And one of the teachers from my middle school had come to it, and she walked in and said, "This is like the damn United Nations." And my mother and father just laughed and said, "Yes, it is, absolutely." My father worked at Kennedy Airport, the airlines, and we grew up basically in an environment of different cultures, languages, religions, beliefs. So it never shocked me, and it didn't shock my parents when I came out to them. They always wanted to be sure that I was safe, number one, and number two, that they wanted me to find somebody who I would be happy with for my entire life. So that kind of support was absolutely amazing. And it's rubbed off. I mean, that's exactly what I've tried to do. And my siblings are the same thing. I couldn't ask for a better family or support. And what I've tried to do is tell other people that There are ways to educate your family, and if you can't do that, there are other kinds of families. I talked a lot about the fact that a lot of people in the LGBTQ community have more than one family, and you've got your birth family, and then you've got your belief, your lifestyle family, and those are your friends, those who are with you through thick and thin, and you find that in a lot of different places. You can start by calling the Trevor Project or other local hotlines. If you look in the yellow pages under organizations, you'll find it right there. But to hold it all in and become angry and bitter and depressed and to get to the point where you feel the only answer is to kill yourself, it's not the answer. It's not the answer at all. You've got a full life ahead of you. And believe it or not, as bad as you might think things are much better now than they were before. There are so many opportunities now. And there are wonderful organizations that support you. Whoever you are, whatever you are, there are organizations there that will support you. And if you're lucky to live in a community, large or small, out here in the desert, there are so many resources for kids out here. And in most other communities in Southern California, you'll find it. But I've been in Idaho, Montana, I've been in Ohio, I've been in Alabama, and I go to the yellow pages and I open it up and look to see what's there. I usually try to have a contact. So I say, look, and if not, just call the Trevor Project and they will be right there for you. Or get on the phone and call, or look on your computer and call Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, one of the best organizations in the country. They are always there to cover our back.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.